Hi, I'm ESPN college basketball analyst and ESPN radio host Doug Gottlieb with this week's exclusive Bubble Watch Extra brought to you by Men's Rogaine Unscented Foam. Listen, the bubble is fluid. It will contract, it will expand all within the process of 1 week, all giving us our 68 teams on Selection Sunday. But I can tell you this, that if your particular team wins the games I believe they need to win, they will get in regardless of what happens with that bubble. If not, they'll put themselves at the mercy of the committee, and then all of a sudden teams like a Drexel, like an Oral Roberts, like an Iona come into play. Let's bounce to the Big Six conferences. We'll also include the Atlantic 10 since, frankly, they performed better than the Pac-12 did out of conference. Also keep an eye on the Mountain West Conference, in which Colorado State just needs to get to the semifinals, and I think they'll be in pretty good shape. They obviously have to get by TCU, beat TCU on a neutral site. You'd feel pretty good about yourself. That would be the seventh conference we'll take. Let's start with the Pac-12, which so many people have, rightly, based upon their paltry record against the RPI Top 50, especially the record out of conference, been down on. When you look at Washington, who backed their way into the Pac-12 championship, they would be wise to get to the finals. That would mean that Washington would have to beat either Washington State or Oregon State in order to get to the semifinals, and then maybe beating Arizona or a UCLA team that just beat them at Poly Pavilion. It's being played at the Staples Center in LA. Washington gets to the finals. They're not a virtual lock, but a likely lock to be in. Anything short of that, they put themselves in very precarious position because they do have what's considered a bad home loss to South Dakota State. Not because South Dakota State's not a quality team, but by 20 points at home. Then you consider that they didn't win games away from home. Nevada lost, St. Louis lost, Marquette lost, Duke lost, and all of a sudden the losses just start adding up, and UW would be on the bubble. Arizona, horrible loss to Arizona State. They have to beat Washington, get to the finals in order to put themselves on the bubble. They get to the finals. I believe they're in pretty good shape. Obviously, they win it, they're going to get in. Cal, who should have tied to win this league, lost at Stanford, lost at Colorado. You lose 2 of 3 coming down the stretch. You can't lose your first game in what's likely to be a rematch against your arch rival Stanford, being played at a true neutral site in Los Angeles. They get to the semifinals. Cal should feel relatively safe, but they want to get to the finals. That would mean taking down a red-hot Oregon club who's won 7 of 8 since DeVoe Joseph's come back. Now, Oregon would face Colorado likely in their first game. Colorado, a team that they just beat on their own home floor. Colorado, who has struggled away from home, but Colorado, though they're not a bubble team, has the talent to win this tournament. By my estimation, the only Pac-12 teams that could feel fairly safe heading into Selection Sunday are if any of the top 4, Washington, Arizona, California, or Oregon, get to the finals. Those 2 teams could feel pretty safe, and of course the team that wins it is the only one that will breathe a sigh of relief knowing they don't have to watch Selection Sunday to know if they're going to be in, but where they're going to be going. Really interesting to see what happens with the Pac-12 because essentially they have mid-major resumes, and you have 4 teams at the top with quality road wins against one another and no real quality wins outside of the conference to speak of. We'll go to the Big 12. There's only one bubble team, and that's Texas. Now, Texas has a decent out-of-conference resume. No bad losses, good win at UCLA, good win against Temple. Within conference play, nothing really to speak of in terms of beating the top 3. Didn't beat Baylor, didn't beat Missouri, didn't beat Kansas. They did beat Iowa State, didn't beat Kansas State, both at home. If they can beat Iowa State in the first game, which will be technically the second round of the quarterfinals, in what's actually a road game. No one travels like Iowa State fans when they're up, when they're down, especially in Kansas City. You win that game, I think based upon where the bubble is, Texas would feel pretty good about themselves. And then possibly a rematch with the Missouri club, whom they lost to twice. Obviously, Texas gets to the finals. They would be a lock to be in the NCAA tournament with those 2 quality wins. I think an Iowa State win alone, though, puts Texas in pretty good shape. We'll go to the Atlantic 10, where Temple seems to be a virtual lock. Xavier plays what's a de facto play-in game, or definitely a play-out game, if Dayton can beat George Washington. Dayton, Xavier, again, went to overtime at the Cintas Center going back about 2 weeks ago. Whoever loses that game is out. Don't watch Selection Sunday. You're playing the NIT. Whoever wins that game is in pretty good shape. You feel like St. Louis is in good shape, so it's possibly a 3-bid league. And, of course, if you know anything about the Atlantic 10 tournament, you know that there's always a team that doesn't belong or wasn't a bubble team that creeps in, whether it's a Dayton, whether it's a St. Joe's, or maybe it's a St. Bonaventure. led by Andrew Nicholson. We'll go to the SEC, where suddenly Tennessee is picking up steam as an at-large. Now, though it helps them in name recognition that they got the 2 seed, it hurts them in terms of who they're going to play in their first game, because they'll play Ole Miss and Auburn, 2 teams that do nothing for them if they win that game. But if they lose it, it clearly knocks them out. Now, if they win it, they might get another matchup with a Vanderbilt team whom they just beat at home. This is a Vanderbilt team that I believe Tennessee has to beat. If Tennessee can get to the finals of the SEC tournament, something that essentially requires 1 good win, I believe Tennessee, despite the fact they have 13 losses and several bad ones, including one to Oakland early in the season, I think Tennessee would actually dance, but got to win two games to do it. We'll go to the ACC, where North Carolina State somehow is hanging on the bubble. Boston College winnable game. Virginia, a team that backs their way in the NCAA tournament, stealing one late against Maryland. Virginia's a team they can beat. NC State has to beat Virginia and then has to at least pass some sort of eye test against North Carolina if they play Carolina in the semis. I don't think they have enough to get in without a Carolina win, but if some things fall their way, if some of the other teams that I said had to win games, Texas loses, Xavier loses, other bubble teams lose, they could get in simply with a win over Virginia, but it probably doesn't prove enough, as Virginia is simply a 500 team in the ACC. Then we move to the biggest bracket, the Big East, which of course begins on ESPN, the family networks, on Tuesday. A couple teams of interest. I believe that UConn is probably in. But if they lose to DePaul, they're not getting in. You're not getting in if down the stretch you go 6-12 and you have a loss to DePaul to end your season. That win over Pittsburgh looked good in imagery only, having your coach back on the sidelines, but Pittsburgh's not an NCAA tournament team. A loss to DePaul, and frankly a bad loss to West Virginia, if other teams won more games, would put them in bubble position. I think UConn's good, but you can't withstand a loss to DePaul in your first game. The other bubble teams to keep an eye on, you feel like West Virginia's in with a win over South Florida, and then there's South Florida. I know they sit there at the 6th seed, and you say, how could a 6th seed, a 12-win team in the Big East, be on the bubble? But they are. And frankly, the schedule doesn't help them all that much. Rutgers or Villanova in the first game. They swept Villanova and beat Rutgers in their only matchup earlier this year. You win that game, then you face Notre Dame, a team whom beats you, a team that plays your style of slow-down basketball. By my estimation, South Florida, in order to get in the NCAA tournament, has to get past Notre Dame, has to get all the way into the semifinals. Otherwise, despite what will be 13 conference wins, even if they beat Rutgers or Villanova in their first game in the Big East tournament, 13 Big East wins will not be enough because, as those of us who follow it on a yearly basis know, it's not how many wins you have, it's the quality of teams that you beat, and they just don't have the quality wins to couple or to battle the bad losses they had early in the season, losses to Old Dominion, losses to Penn State, loss to Auburn, and blowout losses in conference.